The beginning of the Gospel of Luke is filled with these tender stories. Mary gets visited by the angel to foretell of Jesus, and she sings this song. And it's a beautiful song, all the settings of it we hear when we sing the Magnificat. Zechariah gets visited by an angel, and he sings a song, and then Simeon sings a song. Now the songs and all of this tenderness of what's happening with this baby Jesus, mixed in there are some words that are not so tender, but a little bit edgy. When we sing Mary's Magnificat, it always has this glorious tune, but if you listen to the words, it's calling for the tearing down of the powerful and wealthy and the lifting up of the lowly. It is a song about radical revolution, and I think we miss that sometimes in the beauty of the notes. Zechariah's song after John the Baptist is born is a song about God's salvation coming to the people and about how John is going to be a prophet. And prophets, we know in the Bible, it does not often go well for them, so there's a little edge to that one too. Now Simeon's song is not quite as edgy. He says, "Now, Lord, you let your servant go in peace. Your word has been fulfilled. My own eyes have seen the salvation that you have prepared in the sight of every people, a light to reveal you to the nations," or we might say to the Gentiles, "and the glory of your people Israel." It's a song about God's grace being stretched all the way out to gather up all the peoples and to bring together the people of Israel who are God's chosen people, but with all of the rest of the people too. That can be edgy if you think about it, but the real edge in this story comes when he turns and blesses Mary and Joseph and then has this little conversation with Mary, where he says this child is destined for the falling and the rising of many in Israel. He will be a sign that will be opposed and will reveal the inner thoughts of many. And then he looks at her and says, "And your own soul will be pierced too." These are foreboding words. But they're words that I think we can spend a little bit of time in. He talks about Jesus being a sign that will be opposed. When I think of opposition, what's the first word that comes to mind? When your kid is being one of opposition, what do they say? No, right? When they learn that word, how often do they say it? All the time. Opposition, right? And if you think about the things we oppose in the world, we say no. When I go to camp, whether it's in North Carolina or the camp that we have here in Florida, these camps are out in the middle of nowhere, but they're surrounded by other people's land. And if you get out all around the edges of the camp, you will encounter fences, and they are not often the most well-kept fences. There's usually a little bit of strung-out barbed wire, maybe some poles that are standing straight up, maybe some that have fallen down, and somewhere along that fence there's a sign that says what? No trespassing, right? It's a sign of opposition that says there is a boundary here, and those of us that are on the one side of it don't want the rest of you coming over here. It's a sign of opposition. And Simeon says that Jesus is going to be a sign of opposition. And if you think about the story that follows after he grows up in his ministry, it is one where he meets opposition all over the place. Sometimes that opposition comes because he does things on the wrong day, right? He heals on the Sabbath or does something else on the Sabbath. And religious leaders look at him and say, "There's no trespassing on the Sabbath. You can do that work on other days. You should not be doing that work today." Sometimes it's because he spends time with the wrong people. He eats with sinners and tax collectors, and somebody says, "Jesus, that is outside the bounds. You should not be doing that. That's a no trespassing part of our community." Even his own disciples, when he hangs out with the Samaritan woman at the well, they're in town and they come back and they're like, "Whoa, no, you should not be doing that," right? That's a no trespassing zone. But it's not just about the days that he does things or the people that he spends times with. In all of this space, he's doing what Simeon says he's going to do. He's proclaiming God's grace to everybody. And as he proclaims that grace to everybody, they don't like it. They don't like that the people that used to be on the other side of the boundary are being invited in. And so they continually challenge Jesus. How often we hear stories where someone stands up and asks him a question to challenge him, trick him, or otherwise get him to say something he shouldn't. That means that he isn't just a sign to be opposed, he is being opposed. He brings this radical message of grace, and all of the people around him say, No, right? No trespassing. Now, it's easy to maybe want to villainize those people, but many of these people were people of faith, religious leaders who thought they were doing and living in the way that God had called them to live. So when Jesus brings this different answer and they don't like it, they just say, nope, that's outside the bounds of what we understand. This is a no trespassing space. I could tell you a bunch of stories today about people who have put up no trespassing signs, but I think maybe it's better to say, put it in the form of a question and say, where in your life have you put up a no trespassing sign in terms of what the gospel calls us to? Because this is what happens. Simeon tells us how this works. He said, it'll be a sign that's going to be opposed, and the inner thoughts of many will be revealed. Meaning that when you hear the gospel and it offends you, that's something from inside of you that is coming out. When you hear Jesus say something or invite us to do something and it makes you mad, or you start to try to justify why you're not going to do that, or you start to say maybe that's not what Jesus really meant, all of that is kind of us saying, you know what? This is a no trespassing zone right here. I'm not going to let the gospel into that space. So where is that for you? It can be different for each of us. Jesus tells us to pray for our enemies. Did you ever say no to that one? I'm not praying for those terrorists or those extremists or those people that vote the other way, right? That's what Jesus said to do, but we can put up a no trespassing zone and say that's too much. Jesus tells us in more than one place to be generous, and I hope we all are, and you probably think, yeah, I can be generous, and then Jesus tells the one guy, give it all away and follow me. And then we're like, well, that might be a little bit much. We'll put a little bit of a no trespassing sign and say, I earned this fair and square. I'll spend it like I like. Jesus tells us to forgive. And we can say, well, yeah, I mean, I can forgive, but not that one person because that pain was too much, right? And so we put up a little no trespassing sign and say, I'm going to keep this little part where I'm not going to forgive. Jesus, in lots of ways, crosses the boundaries of people that are different. And so he might tell the story of the Good Samaritan. The hero of the story of the Good Samaritan is the hated foreigner. And so when we hear that story and hear Jesus say, welcome the stranger among you, we can say, well, I mean, I can be nice to strangers, Jesus, but you don't really want us to just let everybody in, right? We have laws. We have ways of doing these things. We're going to put a no trespassing zone sign around that because that's too much to ask. And I could keep going because there's a lot in the gospel. And for each one of us, there's something that Jesus says where we're like, that's too much. Jesus says, serve me and follow me. And we say, yeah, I can do that. Pick up a cross and follow me all the way to death. Well, I don't know about death, right? Maybe just the serving you part in the easy places was good. So just like those people that were around Jesus, we have these no trespassing zone signs. And with those that were around Jesus, as Jesus continued to proclaim this gift of radical grace, where did that get him? The cross. It was too much. He crossed too many lines, and it ended up putting him on the cross. But that's not the whole story, right? So if you continue to listen to what Simeon had to say, he says that Jesus will be a sign that will be opposed, and we're right there with all the people around him. It will reveal their inner thoughts, which is what happens when we get amped up about what the gospel challenges us on. And not all of that is in the same space. Sometimes Jesus tells us that we are beloved, wonderful children of God, and we don't believe that either. We don't believe that we can be forgiven. We don't believe that grace can even apply to us, right? Sometimes the challenge goes the other way. And in all of that challenge, in all of that space where Jesus is speaking to us and our internal selves are opened up, Simeon gives us another little bit of detail that's important. Simeon says at the very beginning of the bit, he says, this child is destined for the falling and the rising of many. So if you think about our falling as us tapping up that little no trespassing sign, then the rising comes. What is the word there for rising, do you guess? Resurrection. The falling and the rising. Before Simeon says anything about the opposition, he says Jesus is going to come and he's going to bring the falling and the rising. So when Jesus ends up on the cross, He dies, right? Because people just couldn't deal with the grace and the love that he brought. But then God's not done yet. God raises him to new life. And so it is with us that we can put up all these no trespassing signs, but God is not done with us. God does not mind our boundaries very well. God doesn't care where we put up a no trespassing sign. God is going to come and bring us grace and bring us love. Because when you put up a sign like that, when it comes to the gospel, what we're really saying is that there's a part of our life that we don't want transformation to happen in. Now, it might be we don't want it to happen because it just hurts too much to imagine thinking about it. It might be that we're so angry that we just don't want to deal with it. But anytime we say, no, God, you're not going to touch that part of my life, we're saying, keep that transformation out of here. The thing about boundaries, though, if you put up a no trespassing sign and people actually pay attention to it, that keeps others out, right? What else does it do? Keeps you in and isolates you from all of the rest of that. So when God tears down our signs and tears down our fences, what's really happening is we're being freed. We're being freed to live into that transformation that Jesus can bring to us in that rising, in that resurrection. That can be scary, and transformation can be hard, but God's promise is that the other side of it is life, which is why Simeon sings, because he sees it. He says, my own eyes have seen the salvation that you have prepared for all of the peoples, a light to reveal you to the nations and the glory of the people Israel. Simeon is able to see that blessing and see that promise, even as he speaks a tough word to Mary and says that her own soul is going to be pierced. He knows that that rising is coming and that resurrection is coming. So my hope for all of us this day is that we can know that, yeah, we're going to hang up no trespassing signs. There's going to be seasons of life where we just can't deal with the things that the gospel calls us to. But we also should know that God is way more persistent than we are at tearing those signs down and bringing transformation to our lives. So may we be blessed to live in that transformation, to sing in response, and to trust that God's promises are true and that we can carry them with us out into the world as we go. Amen.